Hi, I'm Patrick Lear. I'm here with Joel Beck, who's running as a candidate for U.S. Congress for the state of Nevada. Hi, Joel.
Hey, Patrick.
How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well.
Good. So, we wanted to find out why you're running for office.
I'm running for office because I, like many other Americans, see that there's some troubles that we're experiencing. And the candidates that were in the field prior to my announcing my candidacy, they didn't have any recognition of what the problems were, let alone any solutions. So, being a problem-solving kind of guy, I figured I'd better get in there, throw my hat in the ring, and see if possibly I can get these people to understand what is going on and try to find a solution. If not, then I'd do so myself.
Excellent. So, what, in your perspective, in your opinion, are the problems that they're not seeing?
I think the most pressing issues that we're seeing, that I'm seeing in the country, are the kitchen table issues, the crushing inflation, the energy crisis, which is as a result of the Green New Deal, the monetary policy, which is contributing to the inflation, and then this engineered food crisis that's coming about. And there's one other thing I would like to mention that many people are unaware of, is that on March 9th, the Brandon administration did an executive order to come up with a digital currency. And that is supposed to take place this fall. And if you read it, that executive order, several times it's mentioned that it's supposed to apply to climate change. Climate change is mentioned multiple times in that. So you can see where that is going to lead. If you extend your carbon tax credits too much, you could lose purchasing power.
So is it, you think, is kind of like the Chinese credit system?
Exactly. It'll be like the Chinese credit system. So there's a myriad of reasons in which they can turn off your ability to make purchases. It could be you said something on social media that they disapprove of, because it coincides with this disinformation bureau that the Brandon administration set up. It could be because you've used your energy allotment, or you didn't get a vaccine, something along those lines. There's a lot of reasons in which that could be used against Americans. And it's not like it hasn't happened before, because it happened in Ottawa during the trucker strike.
And what are you referring to there?
There was a big protest in Ottawa, Canada, involving truckers, and the restrictions that they had to get vaccinated rather, and before that they could work their jobs.
And there were restrictions on the money they got too, right?
Yeah, they shut down their bank accounts. And so it was not even just the drivers of these trucks that participated in this protest. Their families' ability to make purchases was also negatively impacted. So that's kind of a concerning thing. So there isn't any other candidate that is actually looking at that, let alone trying to find a solution. I've looked at it. I'm able to prioritize these different problems that we have, and I've got a solution as to how we can correct them.
Oh, well, that's if you can't diagnose the problem, then you can't find a solution either, right?
Yes, exactly.
So, so how do you propose to fix these problems?
It's pretty basic. It's straightforward. Joining the Freedom Caucus in Congress, building that up to a number of people so that it becomes a formidable voting bloc, and then we can direct the way that legislation either gets passed or doesn't. So that's one of many ways. If nothing else, then you can always block what the administration is doing, much like the Democrats did when Trump was in office. So he tried to push some legislation through, for his agenda, and the Democrat-controlled Congress made a problem for him, so he couldn't do it.
And on a personal level, if you don't have access to these other to the Freedom Caucus, is there anything else that you feel that you can do that you
could submit legislation and try to convince people to see why that's a benefit to them and their constituents.
Well, we were talking earlier, and you mentioned something about transparent legislation.
Yes.
You want to tell everyone about that? I thought that was a fantastic idea.
Well, I think there should be transparency in all aspects of government. We shouldn't have any of these, backroom deals or a situation where we got a bill that you have to pass it to find out what's in it. Should I get into to office, as soon as I get an electronic copy of any legislation, I would immediately post it to a website and let others take a look at it and find out what kind of stuff is in there that I may have missed. And if there's something that is like a poison pill that's hidden somewhere within it, then that would be an automatic no. But it should be transparent, and it should be not only that the bill is there, but you should know my voting record, everybody's voting record, who supported it, who didn't, and not make it difficult to do so. If you go to the congress.gov and try to find legislation now, it's a moving target. You can't directly link to it if you had like a web server or something like that, and you want to say, here's this legislation. If you do that, it'll be different the next time you go back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not good. I guess that's why people don't participate.
Yeah, well, there's some other organizations that will take that legislation and do something similar, but in terms of my ideas to enhance transparency, having that available for my constituents, those people that I'm elected to represent, so that they can see why I voted the way that I did.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you.
Were there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Some of the things that I would like to do, other than prioritizing and tackling the most pressing issues that are affecting us today, like I said, the kitchen table issues, is the food scarcity. We know what it is that they're doing. I want to find out why they're doing this, and then put some sort of a mechanism in place so that it cannot occur again. And I think a lot of it is bureaucratic nonsense, that somebody is doing something through some of the bureaucracies, like the FDA, for example, shutting down baby formula production, so that us as a first world nation, as we'd like to believe, we've got to fly in baby formula from other countries when it's readily available in Canada and in Mexico. That indicates that the problem is specific to the United States and that somebody is pushing that.
I love it. You're addressing the real issues that interest people. So are you, other than those two areas, are there other areas of priorities that you think need to be addressed?
Well, there's some other things that are on my wish list. For example, a balanced budget, term limits, flat tax, those kinds of things. The balanced budget would be great, because without it, we have what's happening now, where we always have a continuing resolution, and it's a must-pass bill, and because it's must-pass, they got to get everybody to vote for it, otherwise you're a bad guy. And so it opens the gates so that these people can load it up with all kinds of pork and stuff that should not be in the bill, like $4 million for higher education in Egypt, or millions of dollars for gender studies in some other foreign country.
Can you go into, you kind of explained it quickly. Can you go into more detail? What are you talking about this legislation? Can you give me an example? I think
Continuing resolution,
or
would be like
any kind of legislation that has a poison pill in it, so to speak.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm not sure everybody knows it. I didn't quite understand it as well as I do now, because you explained it to me.
Okay. Like an omnibus bill, I'll use that as an example. I did a demonstration at a speech recently, and what I used was a clear glass bowl, which was a horrible example because most legislation is not transparent. But that was the vessel to which I added some M&M's candy into it, and I said, this represents legislation. Here in this legislation, we've got some of these M&Ms that are good, that are fine, some of them that will put you in the bathroom, some that will put you in the hospital, and some will put you in the ground. But when you're voting for this entire vessel of garbage that's in this stuff, with some good things, you got to consume the entire thing with your yes vote, or you can reject the entire thing with a no vote. And so that was the example that I used, and people seemed to grasp that and see how legislation is ultimately crafted, because these must-pass bills, these omnibus bills, in order to keep the government running, they're saying you're a bad guy if you don't vote for it because you're not going to fund all these necessary areas of the government. That allows them to open the door to include all this other bad stuff.
Am I wrong, or isn't there some kind of rule in Congress that you are not allowed to include items that are not related to the title of the bill?
No, that's the problem. I think one of the important things that we need to have is a single item legislation. That bill stands or fails on its own merits. You don't add other things in there to try to get more votes or to spend a lot more of taxpayers' money.
Yeah, that's. So the other, I think you were talking to me earlier about inflation and some other issues that were priorities.
Well, we have a monetary system it's a fiat currency is what it is. It's not backed by anything other than what they refer to as the full faith and credit of the United States. When there is a gap between how much you're receiving, the Treasury is receiving in tax receipts, and how much Congress is spending, and it's, the House of Representatives is where all the spending originates. When there is a gap there, that money has to come somewhere to close that gap. And so we can either borrow it or we can print it out of thin air. And when we go the latter route, it devalues our currency. And so they start printing this money, and then what happens? There's supply and demand issues. There's too many dollars chasing too few goods. And then you have a situation where you got $100 in the bank. The purchasing power of that $100 isn't the same after these inflationary forces kick in. And so now you're going to need $120 to purchase the same item. And it's all a direct result of this thing that economists call Keynesian economics. So you spend and borrow a lot of money today, and then you pay it back in the future with cheaper dollars. And in order to get these cheaper dollars, you have to put forth inflation, which clobbers anybody that's saving.
Yeah. So that basically is stealing from people.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, especially the savers.
Yeah.
And it's a tax. It's a tax that the Congress doesn't have to actually pass, because it's something that everybody has to pay when they're acting in the economy.
So it's a hidden tax.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, nowadays it's not so hidden, is it?
No, definitely. No,
Pretty obvious.
Yeah, exactly. And then the cost of fuel too.
Well, the cost of fuel is actually contributing to inflation, because anything that uses fuel, it has to translate in something. Anything that I have today came at some point on a truck. Now, diesel fuels being at ultimate high prices, higher than they've ever been in the history of this nation, that gets translated in transporting anything to a store for us to purchase, or food, or farm implements are using diesel. So that's driving up the cost of everything else.
Of everything. So what solutions do you have for this problem in particular, and for others that you've mentioned before?
Well, I think we need to have a balanced budget so we don't have to print money. In terms of the new Green New Deal, I am a America First constitutional conservative. What I mean by that is that we don't have to follow the rules of the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, or any of these other groups, and in exercising our rights as Americans. So when I say that, in the Constitution, none of these globalist organizations are listed in the Constitution. So we don't have to actually follow that when they want to dictate to us, like the Paris Climate Accord that's going to dictate our energy policy, for example. So America has, something like a third of all the organic fuels, as I like to call them, instead of fossil fuels, that in the world we don't need to purchase oil from any other country. We can all do it here. So we can open up the spigots, just turn it back to a way it was 2 years ago. You know, the brand administration's got a motto of build back better. Mine is put it back the way you found it.
Exactly. Yeah. Excellent. Just very common sense.
Yes.
Which is not that common, as you mentioned earlier, anymore, right?
Right.
And would you have any? Would you be inclined to increasing taxes?
Never. Americans are tapped out as it is, and many families need people to work in order to keep things working. And that's not right. Back in the 50s, it was really great because, you know, you have a single wage earner. You know, dad went off to work, mom stayed home, took care of the house and the kids, and everybody was happy. Now we got a situation where both parents have to work and the kids need to go to daycare. Nobody's taking care of them, and I think that's the source of a lot of problems in the country.
Yeah. And it causes problems with education, right?
Causes problems with education because, you know, mom and dad get home at night, they're tired, they can't see what their kids are learning in school, and they insert all of this crummy stuff like CRT and grooming type things in the curriculum.
And then parents, when they've had a busy schedule like that, have a problem going to school board meetings and so forth as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand that. So, with that in mind, so the inflation you were talking about is really a double whammy, right? Because with taxation and inflation, you're going to get higher taxes.
Right. You got inflation, so it's an inflammatory economy. Your home value goes up because of inflation, and so your assessed value on your property goes up, and so you're getting taxed more because of inflation. A lot of local governments are receiving record tax receipts as a result of that.
And would it also push you into the next tax bracket?
If your wages increase as a result of inflation, but from what I have been seeing, I don't see that incomes are increasing at the same rate as inflation. So it's a net
Of course not.
detriment. No.
If you look at the history of inflation, I don't think wages ever increase at the same rate as inflation.
No, I mean, a perfect example, and this is a great example because the math is so easy. Dollar Tree is a discount store that people go shopping at. Everything was $1. They raised it to $1.25. That's 25%. It's really easy math. Now, how many people got a 25% raise in their employer?
Oh, I know I haven't.
No, neither have I. So, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been, we've heard about this shooting that happened in Texas recently, and that now there's attempts at curtailing the Second Amendment. What are your thoughts on that? What's your position, and how would you address it?
I think that the Second Amendment, contrary to what President Brandon has said, is absolute. The right for people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Take it a step further. Many people don't realize that guns, the gun manufacturers have to pay special taxes. There's special taxes that are assessed on ammunition. And people were complaining about having to show identification in order to vote because that was tantamount to a poll tax. Well, that's not true, because who doesn't have identification? But if I would wish to conceal carry, I've got to pay a large fee for that, and that's a tax to enjoy my Second Amendment.
Yeah. So with the Second Amendment, I heard the White House say that they didn't want to increase security in schools. That wasn't where they were going. What's your perspective on that?
Well, there's a lot of veterans that were taught to work in the infantry. For example, I'm an aviation veteran myself. So retired Air Force, Desert Storm veteran. My focus has been on aviation, but there's a lot of people who are focused on, say, for example, infantry. They come back with skills that are directly applicable for that environment. Many of them can work at these schools and provide the security necessary to stop these types of shootings.
Hmm.
You know, guns have been around for a long time. What's changed? We hadn't had those problems in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Now we do. It's a societal issue. It's not a gun issue.
Yeah, somebody made the point to emphasize your point that if we try to take guns away because kids got shot in the school, if you made the same analogy about 9/11, then we would ban airplanes.
Yes. Or, you know, you've got somebody gets a car accident, we should ban automobiles.
Exactly.
You know, where does it end? And, you know, crazy people will always find a way to harm or kill another human being. It could be a baseball bat, you ban those, knives, bowling balls, what does it matter?
But doesn't that go back to the whole reason for the Second Amendment?
No, actually, I don't think it does.
Well, what's the whole reason behind the Second Amendment to start with?
In order to ensure a free state.
Mhm.
That's the reason.
Okay.
And that the reason for the Second Amendment is to stop a tyrannical government so that the citizens had some recourse. When they say things, ridiculous things like, well, what are you going to do? You're going to get an aircraft carrier? Well, I've got two. I live at Lake Tahoe. Everybody, I water ski behind them on the weekends. Or are you going to get a tank? Well, I've got two parked in my garage. You know, these are ridiculous statements that people make. But it is a way that, you know, the government, whenever they've taken away citizenry's ability to defend themselves, is always led to democide. And so, no, I'm a strong believer in the Second Amendment, the entire Constitution, and all of the Bill of Rights.
So, is any part of the Constitution negotiable?
No, well, let me take that back. Yes, if you don't like something in the Constitution, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. The instructions on how you go about amending the Constitution are contained within that document, and until you do that, the Constitution says what it says.
I like it. Absolutely.
So you got to go through that process. You don't start a game of Monopoly and then you change the rules as you go along. You know, I'm a great golfer. I've got the highest score of anybody that I've ever golfed against. So, and in that way I win. Right? So I changed the rules at that point.
Exactly.
You can't do that when you have a government that's constrained by the Constitution that was as it was designed.
So it's the government trying to change the rules so it can be unconstrained by the rules.
Well, oftentimes it happens with our crooked judicial system. You know, anybody who thinks that America's courts are legitimate neither has been to a court or know anybody who has.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody can give an example of how the courts are misinterpreting the law or selectively applying the law. For example, there's a recent case. Hillary Clinton's was a campaign manager, was taken to court for lying to the FBI. And apparently, if you're a Democrat, you can lie to the FBI, but if you're a Republican, you cannot.
Selective application of the law. So it's unequal protection under the law, right?
Correct.
So, so obviously, when you're in Congress, there are certain things you can have an impact on, and other things you can't. So how would you handle this particular instance with selective application under the law?
Well, you can call attention to it.
Yeah.
Being in that position puts me in a position where I can have a platform to call it out. I'm just a regular citizen at this point, but if I was a congressman, then I could actually call attention to that and at least get somebody to pay attention to what it is that I have to say. You know, writing a letter to the editor wouldn't get published.
That's true. Yeah, good point. So what are your thoughts on Ukraine?
Well, the Ukraine government is probably the most corrupt government in all of Europe. And with that corruption, puts a lot of opportunities in there for people to do bad things. And so we have Nancy Pelosi's son. We've got Mitt Romney's son. We've got John Kerry's son. And we got Brandon's son. All making money in the Ukraine. Isn't it interesting? Wow. So now we got to spend $40 billion with a B dollars over there so that these four individuals can continue to receive their kickbacks from. I mean, Hunter Biden, he doesn't have any experience in energy, but he happens to be on a board of an energy company.
And making a lot of money at it too, right?
Yeah, yes, he is. So that's part of the problem that we have over there. And it goes back many years. This is nothing new. So I don't want to risk a single drop of American blood over there in order to protect their corruption activities. And however, if you read that 30-page bill, as I have, you'll find that we already are militarily involved. That much of that $40 billion goes to pay for military operations associated with the Ukraine situation.
Wow. But your perspective on that is whether, let me ask you this, whether there was corruption in Ukraine or not, does that change your policy?
Well,
Your foreign policy, your view on that?
Yeah, I don't think we need to be involved with any additional foreign entanglements. We are not the world's police force. And America has to pay for that, not only in blood, but in cash as well. And we can't continue to do that.
Yeah. But why can't we continue to do that? Some people would
It's
argue
just morally wrong to begin with. Certainly it's morally wrong. But, America used to be respected, and then we became feared, and now we're resented because of our meddling in other countries' affairs. Now, in this case, they're inviting us into their country to meddle in their affairs, but look at who's inviting us. Zelensky's a billionaire. How do you become a billionaire as a public servant?
Yeah, well, that points to corruption.
Certainly. He's got a $35 billion or $1 million house in someplace in Florida. $30 million buys a lot of real estate in Florida.
That poses the question for any politician who does very well, right?
Yes.
That's a red flag for anyone who pays attention.
Yeah, but here we are sending billions of
Yeah.
our tax dollars over there to encourage more of this behavior.
So you really see that you can make a difference in Congress by helping to clean up this mess.
Well, we certainly wouldn't vote for that kind of money to be spent on those kinds of purposes. How about we take care of America first? As I said, I'm a commercial rated pilot, so I'm going to use a lot of aviation analogies here. What does the flight attendant tell you in the pre-flight briefing is put your own oxygen mask on first. How can we be expected to help other countries when we have problems at home?
Exactly. That's an excellent analogy. Yeah, absolutely. I really liked earlier you talked about, open sourcing. I'm calling it open sourcing, the legislative process. Did you mean to say that you were going to publish the legislation online, and then you could have other people delve into it and point out what was wrong with it?
I think
your constituents in particular?
Yeah, my constituents in particular, but anybody from any congressional district in the country has access to a web browser, can come and they can read the legislation as it's submitted to the representatives in Congress to vote on, and they can find whatever it is that is good or bad. And a lot of this legislation is referencing stuff that's already in place. So a 30-page bill may require you to read 100 additional pages and to see what else it affects. So getting the help from additional Americans reading this would help pull that stuff out. But I think even more important is that this needs to be something that all Americans have access to. Nothing should happen in the dark. Full transparency, and all Americans need to be able to know what their government is up to. And then I can reconcile it with the Constitution. So you say, where is this legislation authorized by the Constitution? If it's not, then it's an automatic no. If it's 3,000 pages and they want me to vote on it in 10 minutes, it's an automatic no.
Exactly. Yeah. That takes a certain amount of courage, because there's a lot of bullying and pressure, I'm sure, from those people in Congress who want to pass the bill, or trying to surreptitiously pass this. If they tell you, oh, you have 10 minutes to read this, and it's 3,000 pages, then obviously it's not possible. How do you plan on being able to resist? Because a lot of congressmen, they just go along because they don't want to take the heat for having said no.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people go into Congress for the wrong reasons. They don't go into Congress in order to enforce the restrictions of the Constitution. They don't go into Congress to represent people. They go in there to enrich themselves, or it's, some people say it's an ugly person's way to get into Hollywood.
Oh,
Yeah, so, in that case, maybe I qualify, but I don't qualify in that I am not going to lessen my beliefs in a small government, lower taxes, and it must be constitutional. So that's another thing that I think needs to be attached to every single piece of legislation, is where in the Constitution is that authorized.
that's an excellent idea. An authorization clause.
Yeah, this is by Article, 4, Section 3.
Exactly. That's an excellent idea. Yeah, I commend you for that. So as you work to correct America's most pressing problems, what else would you like to be working on?
And I think that there's a lot that needs to be done simultaneously. You don't have to just focus on one. You could have several things happening at the same time. I'd like to see a balanced budget amendment. I'd like to see the balanced budget amendment being that if it is the budget is not balanced by a certain date, then you do not get paid. Your staff does not get paid after that date. And it's not going to be one of those things, well, we pass it a month later, so we're going to retroactively pay you. No, you forego that pay during that period of time in which that budget was not passed. I'd like to see a flat tax.
Yeah.
The IRS is used as a weapon on people. We have to pay an additional tax to an accountant, for example.
Yeah.
In order to comply with that monstrosity. We can't have that anymore. I'd like to see term limits enacted. There's plenty of people in Nevada that can perform this job, that if they go in for 6 years. Heck, I was in the military. A typical military person retires in 10 years, or 20 years rather. If you did 6 years in the House, you did 12 years in the Senate, you just need 2 more years and to complete 20 years in order to retire. If that's good enough for the military, why not for politicians?
So it's a form of term limits is what you're talking about.
No, we need to have term limits.
Yeah.
I signed the term limit pledge that limits me to serving no more than 3 terms.
Oh, excellent.
So the current incumbent in this district is running for his 7th.
Wow.
And he's been in politics since high school when he ran for class president. So we can't have career politicians, because then they lose touch with people. The founders had regular jobs. They would go to DC once a year and then come home and go back to their farm.
We have term limits for presidents,
Yes.
right?
Yes, we get term limits in the state for state representatives.
So it's not such a big deal.
No, it shouldn't be. But the thing is,
But they managed to, sorry.
you ask, Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi about term limits and they'll laugh at you.
Well, it's become a career.
Yeah, well, it is
Or
a big
worse,
career. That's what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it should be citizen representatives, not elite representatives.
Yeah. Takes us back to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yeah.
For anyone who hasn't seen the movie, it's a great movie with, was it James Stewart, yeah. That's a great movie. Black and white.
Yeah, well, I kind of like black and white movies myself.
Yeah, but some people, I think a lot of, if your viewers haven't seen it, I think it would be a great movie to watch, because I see you kind of like a citizen. Everything you're telling me tells me that you're this genuine citizen who wants to fix things. So I thank you for that. That's very commendable.
Thank you.
So, having said that, tell me why you're the best candidate.
The reason why I'm the best candidate at this time is because you got a choice. You got 5 different candidates. 2 have been selected for us because everybody wants us to focus our attention on 2. And it's been a struggle to even get acknowledged. I had to fight, for example, to get into a meeting today with the Douglas County Republican Women's Club. At first, the invitation wasn't given to me, but then, I asked about it, and then they said, yes, we want you there. Fantastic organization, but, they seem to be focusing on Mark Amodei, the incumbent, going for his 7th term. He's 11 years in office. And then we have the other person that has been selected for us was Danny Darkanian, moved to Northern Nevada about 2 years ago, roughly. He ran for office for the Douglas County Commission. He promised that he would not jump before his first term was up. Just over a year, he decides that that's not good enough for him. He's going to run for Congress. And so people in the county are upset. I'm upset. He displaced what I consider to be a very good commissioner by 17 votes, I'm sorry.
Wow.
And this guy loved his job and wanted to retain it. He just wanted to take the job and use it as a stepping stone to something else, even though he pledged he wouldn't. Okay, you meet these guys in other events, and I asked him, I said, hey, I live in Douglas County. You're my county commissioner. Does the commission have any contingency plans for the event that the economy goes sideways? Which we all know that's actually occurring.
Yeah.
And he says, I cannot speak about policy right now. I'm too focused on my election. So obviously he can't walk and chew gum. I was pretty upset about that. And then Mark Amodei, the incumbent, he doesn't vote right now. He's given that responsibility to some guy that we in Northern Nevada didn't vote for in Ohio. And so, just so I don't be accused, I'm not accused of selecting other people. We've got Kathy Sampson, Dynamite Gal. Hard not to like her. She's a former EMT. And then we've got Brian Nadell, who, if you go to his website, it's he describes himself as a Vegas professional poker legend. And one of his great accomplishments was that he got James Woods to follow him on Twitter, which is, I mean, Nevada is a gambling state. Maybe that's what we need in DC. I don't know. And the bonus of that is that he would think about possibly maybe moving from Vegas to Northern Nevada should he get elected to that position. So, and then you got myself, and I was a civilian when I was called back to active duty for Desert Storm. And my service with the Air Force led to me getting injured, which ended both my military and my civilian career, because I was working as a civilian at United Airlines. And with the problems that we have right now, I don't need the job, but maybe America needs me for that job. And I think that it's important to go back and these historical documents that are so brilliantly written, like the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, where these signers pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. And that's what I pledge to do. I will pledge my life to doing this job to the best of my ability for at least 2 years. My fortune, I am 100% self-funded at this point, and I've served honorably at in the Air Force, and I pledge to be in service honorably for Congress as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the
I
interview.
really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me
Okay,
and
so
our viewers.
yeah, I'm Joel Beck, beckforcongress.us. If you're interested for more information, you can go to my website. Contact me at joel@beckforcongress.us.
Maybe repeat it one more time, because you rattled it off really quickly. You know it, I know it, but maybe not
Okay.
everybody else does.
Yes, it's just a real simple thing. My last name is Beck, FOR, for congress.us, and my email address is that with joel@beckforcongress.us.
And that's BECK, correct?
BECK, Congress.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.